Hi, everyone. Well, while the room is filling, I want to welcome you to the every other week amazing room, the Moral Leadership Club that Jacqueline Novogratz hosts with her friends and community of like-minded leaders on the moral leadership journey. And I will pass it over to Jacqueline to tell you more about this and today's topic. But a few notes for this room today. One, we have a new feature on Clubhouse, which is called back channel or messaging. So you'll see a little plain icon at the bottom right. It's actually a stunning UI UX. And so you can message anyone on Clubhouse if they follow you, just like Twitter or Instagram. If they don't follow you, you can still send a message. It will just end up in their requests, which is a separate little section. So if you have a question, a topic, a challenge that you'd like Jacqueline, Seth, or Benje to weigh in on during this room, feel free to DM me, to message me, back channel me on Clubhouse, or use the method we typically use, which is type it in your bio and raise your hand. And as the discussion evolves, we'll find the appropriate time to involve questions from those who are listening and even bring a few folks up. And if you'd like to join us in this discussion or push us to build on something that the great folks up here are speaking about, please do type it in your bio and raise your hand or send me a DM and we will weave it in as appropriate. So welcome to the Moral Leadership Club. Tap the green house to follow the club and you'll get notifications and information about the rooms that Jacqueline hosts. And I will pass it over to Jacqueline to introduce our great guests and jump right in on this topic of the dip, getting through the hard time.
Thanks so much, Kat, and welcome everyone. This is our second Clubhouse room on moral leadership. As Kat said, new leaders for a new economy, and it's a room truly for people who want to reimagine and how to fix our broken systems. Not just talking about it, but doing something about it. So therefore, I couldn't be more thrilled. Not only to be with you, Kat, but also the inimitable Seth Godin, who wrote the book on the dip, is a close friend, advisor, and Benje Williams, who's another doer from a California family of 10 kids who traveled to Pakistan to build Amal Academy and now is working to save the forest. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation, but this isn't about what we do per se. It's really about the fact that all four of us have tried, failed, gotten up to try again, more times probably than any of us can count. And so how do we not talk about failure necessarily, but what Seth talks about in terms of the dip, this skill of hitting a dip, in other words, hitting walls, finding yourself stuck, and then knowing when to push through and knowing when and how to quit, and or to get up and try again. And so before we start, though, the ritual of this particular room is to always share a poem that is connected to the work that we're going to do. And I am a lover of Persian poetry. This one also is by Hafiz, who writes that I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in despair the astonishing light of your own being. For the dip. And I think so many of us may be in that place in this pandemic. And Kat, you were just in a conversation talking about how many of us are thinking about what should we be doing now? So Seth, you wrote The Dip in 2007, which was a very high-flying time right before the major crash of 2008. And if you could just start us off with what is the dip? And why is it important to understand the dip when we think about moral leadership? And it's really great to be with you.
Oh, and you too, and Benje and Kat, thank you for organizing all of this magic. Let me start by pointing out that the work that we are talking about doing is difficult. That nonprofits are nonprofits for a reason, and that's because they're trying to solve a problem that hasn't been solved yet. Because if it had already been solved, then they wouldn't need to exist. And it's worth identifying that your book about moral leadership is not a book about moral management. It's about moral leadership. And the difference between leadership and management is that management uses power and authority to do what has been done before more efficiently. Whereas leadership is about exploring the edges and discovering a different way forward. And too often, people who care a lot get down on themselves because they haven't solved the problem yet. But what they have discovered is yet another way that the problem can't be solved, and that's worth something in and of itself. So with that warm-up, the dip is a function that I had never seen anyone else write about that basically normalizes quitting. Because all of us have quit. We quit taking ballet lessons when we were 4. No one's walking around in a tutu. And yet, when you're an adult, quitting is identified as this sort of weakness, this bad thing. And my argument in the book, and when people talk about the dip, because the book's not very long and so you can make up your own version of it, is there's a spot where most people give up. And for example, if you go to a gym on February 1st, back when we had gyms, or hopefully when we have them again, is really busy. But by March, a lot of people have quit. And the only people who are truly in shape are the people who have stuck through that hard part, which is 6 weeks after you started in the new year when it gets hard. Organic chemistry, if you want to be a doctor, is the dip. They intentionally put it there so that most people would give up because it's a long path. And so the dip is that spot between high expectations, high hopes, enthusiasm, and the other side, which is the scarce side, which is the people who have stuck it out and managed to get to the other side.
Seth, I love that, as you know, and you've helped me get through more dips over the last 20 years. But you both say that you're normalizing quitting, and you say that the people who actually do the great things can hold to this idea of what could be and could do the work and do the slog. And how do you make sense of those two statements side by side?
Yes, there's the tension, right? So a lot of people have been seduced by the media industrial complex to believe they have to be on this platform and this platform and this platform, and they have to talk to these people and those people and build this way and this. You need to quit the stuff that isn't part of the mission so that you can have the reserves to do the part that most people can't handle. That what the book is about is saying, before you even begin, please acknowledge that there is a dip. Please acknowledge that there is going to be a place where it's hard to get to the other side, and either make sure you have the resources to get through it, or acknowledge that you're not going to try to get through that dip. So if you're starting a nonprofit, raising your first $500,000 is totally different than getting to the point where a foundation is going to write you a check for $3 million. Because in between those two is when you shift from good intentions to a sort of professionalism that a foundation requires. And if you're not willing to make that shift to get through the dip, spending all your days cursing the foundations who aren't sending you money isn't doing you any good. Because they've been very clear. We only fund people who get through the dip. And if you're building something that needs to get to the other side, make sure you've got the resources going in to get there.
I love that. In fact, we're in our office for the first week, for the first time this week, and I just met someone for the first time who joined Acumen about a week ago. And I said, "How's it going?" And she said, "It was amazing." And I said, "Well, you just got to be prepared that you will hit a dip. Get through it. So you should know that this language is part of the very way that we work here." So thank you for that. Benje, I've known you, I feel like I've watched you grow up. And I remember when you went off to Stanford Business School and how courageous you were to leave business school also at a time when people were going for very high-flying jobs and opportunities, and you decided to move to Pakistan with very, very high hopes, big dreams. Set up an institution called Amal Academy to work with young people graduating from tertiary and secondary level universities to give them not just technical competencies, but real moral imagination, leadership skills, so that they could be the leaders of the future. And I wonder if you could just talk about some of the big dips that you've had and what's gotten you through.
Yeah, thanks for that question and introduction, and Seth for not only talking about the dip today, but for writing about it all those years ago, and Kat for moderating this discussion. There have been a lot of dips, Jacqueline, as you know. You've been there for many of them and been alongside of me for many of them. Probably the one that sticks out the most is a couple of years into running Amal Academy, around 2015, 2016. We still at that time had a small team, about 4 or 5 of us, and only I think maybe 100 or 200 fellows who had gone through our 3-month kind of mini MBA career prep fellowship program. And I'm sitting in Lahore, which is about 10,000 miles from where I grew up in Northern California, and had those aspirations that you mentioned of trying to affect change within the Pakistan education system, and feeling just like such a small drop in the ocean, that we weren't creating the type of impact that we had envisioned, and there was so much that we were sacrificing to try and do the work that we were doing. And I remember coming to New York over the winter break after spending the holidays with my family in California, and meeting you, Jacqueline, for a run, and then later meeting you and Chris at your house. And I remember just trying to explain it wasn't exactly hopelessness, but the frustration and the kind of discouragement that I felt that we weren't making enough of a difference and that we needed to do more. And I remember you and Chris at first just looking at me kind of blankly, like, what are you talking about? You're changing the lives of these young people, and it's a small number, but like clearly the results are coming. And I think somewhere along that conversation, something shifted, and you started sharing about your dip at Acumen a couple of years in, when you were having a hard time finding investors and actually, I think, companies to invest in, and asking a lot of those hard questions, and that doubt and that fear sinking in. Is this really going to achieve what I want it to achieve? And things started changing slowly. I remember the other thing that you told me was that you have to build a platform, keep your head down and build a platform. And then once you have that platform, you can really start to leverage it to achieve the types of things that you want to achieve. And I think I met Seth on that same trip. I met Seth a couple of times, and he's always given such great advice. One of the things he said was, you have to set a goal for yourself. You have to set a target so that you're holding yourself accountable. And so our goal was, reaching 10,000 fellows or graduates by 2020, and then really starting to work towards having a deeper systems change impact throughout the country. And so that was one of the biggest dips. And I'll just fast forward for a few seconds and say, I think our CEO is on the line now, Ali Sadiq. I'm back in New York. The team is still working hard, and Ali just told me this morning we're reaching 8,000 fellows this semester. Wow. And working towards teacher training within some of the universities and some of the government schools. And so the change is happening. It's still slow, but it's coming along.
That is so awesome. And I do hope that we can hear from Ali as well, because when you think about what Seth was talking about, Benji, there's something about systems wanting us to stop, and you got through it, but you did quit pieces of it so that you could find greatness where you needed to find greatness. And what was one of the pieces that you did quit so that you could get Amol to where it is, and actually then hand the organization to a new CEO?
Yeah. There were some things that we had to quit along the way. I guess for me, most personally, was realizing after getting to that dip back in 2015, 2016, and getting to a couple thousand fellows, and then Ali joining as COO, actually operations director, then COO. And working alongside of him and then a team of about 50 people, I started realizing that I wasn't the right person to, take the organization to the type of long-term systems change. And so that was another type of dip in which Seth writes about, that, deciding to essentially quit or transition into a different role. And so that was something that I had to let go of for myself, essentially, in order for the organization to really reach the scale and the capacity that we had envisioned. And I realized for myself that I am someone who's really great in that first 3 to 5 years of creating, designing, bringing something from scratch, but maybe not the person to take us to, the hundreds of thousands. Whereas Ali is such a sharp systems operation builder, institution builder. And so we were really great together for a long time, and now he is leading it and I'm supporting him, and it's been fascinating to see how that's worked as well.
I love it. Knowing when to quit. And Benji, thank you for being so personal, and I'll talk a little bit about some of my own dips, but I'd love to hear, Seth, you got into that really personal place of some of the biggest dips you've had, even of late, and what gets you through it. And then, Kat, I'm going right to you.
Let's get tactical, because the 600 people who are here want to do better. They want to make the world a better place. And what does it mean to even think about strategically quitting? What does it mean to plan your journey? So when I was starting out, I bootstrapped with no money a book packaging company inventing books. In the first year, like most people, I had beginner's luck. I sold my first book the first day. Me and Chip Conley sold it for $5,000. That's $2,500 each. I figured if I could do that every week, I could make a living. And then I got 800 rejection letters in a row. And it was a year later, and all that happened was every day 5 people took the time to put a stamp on an envelope, write me a letter, and say no. And what I needed to do was see if anyone had ever succeeded at what I was trying to do. Because it is possible that there is someone on this call who will do something that has never been done before, but it's unlikely. And so I found 2 or 3 people who had been on the path. And I said, well, what are the steps between where I am and where they are? Because as Benji pointed out, if you can't work backwards through the steps, it's very frustrating, because you end up just cursing the darkness instead of realizing that you need to look for kindling, which is the steps to get you to a bonfire. And that was really challenging, because I also went to a business school similar to Benji's and to yours. And there's a lot of peer pressure of, wait a minute, you're not at Bain, you're not at McKinsey, you're a failure. And so comparing yourself to the people who are on the same journey is way more helpful than looking for perfect, because perfect isn't out there. And ever since I've met you, Jacqueline, 20 years ago, I have seen the world differently because of how you see the world and how you live in the world. And that has created an ever expanding series of dips for me to say, well, what would be of use here? Because this isn't about doing work that gets you paid. It's about doing work that matters. And that keeps changing. What matters is. And along the way, we have to harness our resources and our networks so that we're focused on the path. And as Benji has pointed out, that path is there if we look for it.
You say in your book that if you want to be a superstar, you need to find a field with a steep dip, a barrier between those who try and those who succeed. How conscious are we, though, when we try to do these impossible things that there is this steep barrier between where we are and where we need to go, and that if you can get through it, you will do amazing things. How conscious are we, and how conscious should we be for people who are in this conversation, Seth?
Well, so now we got to reference Steve Pressfield's brilliant War of Art and his concept of resistance. I've been lucky enough to meet and work with thousands of people who are building nonprofits. And what I have found is that some of them have intentionally picked something too hard to succeed at. It is safer to pick something impossible, because then you can't blame yourself when it doesn't work. And it's people like you, it's people, we can make a long list of new, fast-growing nonprofits, whether it's Endeavor, Charity Water, or Room to Read, who picked solvable steps to get to this scary place where you are now, as opposed to saying, oh, from my living room, I'm going to solve, climate change. No, you're actually not going to be able to solve climate change from your living room. And if that's the only goal you have in mind, well, then you're hiding.
Well, I would also say, Seth, new 20-year overnight successes.
Exactly. New
right?
20-year
Huge slogs with many times of deep self-doubt and pushing through. Kat, all of us are entrepreneurs. You're the one of the four of us, though, that has led big institutions and turned them around. And so I can imagine you've gone through some very, very deep or steep dips. And both, what do you learn and what gets you through them?
Yeah, I feel like queen of the dips. I love Seth's book so much.
I think you're a good company here.
I'm chips and dip. I am very dippy. One is, this is rooted in a big dip that I grew up through. I won't say in, because I wasn't stuck there, but through, which was when my mom left my dad when I was 9 years old, and I'm the oldest of three girls. And when she came to me and said, she had a very entry-level job, did not have the money to take care of us on her own. Everyone was poor on all sides of the family, which is one of the reasons she put up with these conditions of his alcoholism for so long. And when she came to me and said, that's it, I'm done, we're leaving, much to her surprise, as a 9-year-old, I did not cry. I looked at her and said, what took you so long? And the lesson that, of course, I didn't know when I was 9, but as I grew up and became a leader at a fairly young age of everything from groups, teams, nonprofits, and eventually businesses all around the world, the lesson and the reflection I had was that the people who are closest to the action, whatever the action is, if that's boots on the ground, if it's community work, if it's a business, it's frontline employees, and in business, it's the transaction is the action, wherever that exchange occurs. The people who are closest to the action know what the right thing to do is long before the leader makes the call. But the issue is the people who are closest to the action lack the knowledge or language to articulate the problem or the solution or the opportunity in a scaled way, and they lack the authority to do something about it. And so when I reflected and realized that when my mom made this difficult, albeit delayed, decision, I was in 3 car accidents with my dad by the time I was 9 years old. It was bad for more than a minute. That she struggled with what to do, and could she figure it out if she made the leap? And when she finally did, one of her biggest fears, which was her oldest daughter being scared, when I didn't meet that fear, in her mind, because we've talked about it so many times since then as adults, that it made her think, oh my gosh, I should have done it sooner. But she did it when she was ready, when she thought, if not me, who, if not now when. And that experience, I believe, made me obsessed with the truth. And I mean the true truth, meaning people's lived experiences. And whether that was in my nonprofit work with the UN and the Global Entrepreneurs Council or WEF or just local, hyper-local soup kitchen nonprofit work, that same mindset of understanding what is going on in people's lives now as defined by them, and finding honor in that and inspiration in that and priorities in that, has helped me through every single dip of companies. I go to the people. I go where the action is, and I get such clarity on what really matters and use that to help shape only the few things that we have the bandwidth to focus on. Because if it is a dip, whether that's a tough time, a need to change, something unexpected, a challenge to what is, we humans we're a funnel, not a tunnel. We can only focus on so much. And so navigating the dip requires shining a light in the dark, and better to have it focused and bright than spread out. So how I've learned to try to stay close to the action. And then for myself personally, I had children a little bit later, what's becoming much more normal now, but I was 39 and then 41 when I had my 2 children. I met the love of my life just a year before that. And so I kind of found certain things, big milestones in life later than my mom, than our parents, and it's definitely common of this generation. So all the things that come along with that, the many dips that come along with relationships and having more loved ones and wearing your heart on the outside of your sleeve and children, happened while I had enormous executive responsibilities of these big companies. And in 2020, not only as the world was going into the global pandemic, and my industry, which was franchising and restaurants and food brands, was being impacted in a pretty major way. My youngest daughter, who was 7 months, got very, very ill, and I was in the ICU with her for 2 weeks. And I remember feeling fear, trauma, helplessness, and power all at the same time. I was standing over her, changing her with her feeding tube in, with my AirPods in, restructuring our company, trying to protect every job that I could. And it is the biggest dip that I can remember, both personally and professionally, happening at the exact same time. And I just kept thinking, the only way out is through. The only way out is through priorities. And my priority was my daughter. And then my priority behind that was helping our company navigate with grace and protecting people over profits during a global demand stoppage. So that there are many others, but those come to mind. And then the how is still staying close to the action and getting clear in my mind and in my heart in what matters, what really matters as defined by me, not by what others are saying, and then fighting for that until the very end.
Wow. That was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
It was extraordinary. The words you used, truth, trauma, fear, proximity, it's so obvious why you're such an extraordinary leader, Kat. Thank you for that, truly. I also really appreciated the way that you kind of reminded us that, and maybe this is how life happens, that the real dips often are where you see that confluence of the personal and the professional. When it rains, it pours. And I'm actually thinking, I can tell you exactly where I was standing talking to Benje. Not too long before he decided to leave Pakistan and change his assumptions. But a lot was turned upside down for you, Benje. And thinking about what Kat just talked about, getting close to people, facing fears and realizing that sometimes what you fear most, like your mom, Kat, actually was just illusory. And finding freedom in that, and then making a decision to do the quit and to either find what's great and beautiful in your own organization and your own capacity, or starting something else. And Benje, I can't imagine the soul searching you did, because this was your life, and you had made a massive public statement and commitment to leave one of the world's best business schools and to go to Lahore to do a startup in an area that nobody had really done anything in. And then 5-6 years later, make a decision to do a huge quit, pivot, and restart. What are some of the lessons from that?
Yeah, I think the lessons are still in progress, which is
they always are.
still very much processing, even though it's been now a year and a half since I've been back in the States. And really like 3 years since I started to transition. I think for me, one of the lessons is having people beside you who can carry things forward, but also find ways to include you in that. And Ali is a great example of that. Jacqueline and Seth, you're both great examples of that as advisors who have stayed connected with Amal Academy, even though I'm not there anymore. And that to me is such a powerful lesson for how to help something build and grow beyond just yourself. I think that was one of my biggest fears, was if I left, then, kind of what Kat was saying, the fear ended up not being a reality. I was afraid that if I left, that things wouldn't be sustainable, and the reverse has turned out to be true. The other thing that I think about often and talk about with Ali is just continuing that appetite for risk and for failure. I mean, when I started Amal Academy in 2013, out of business school, I remember Jacqueline writing something, I think it was a LinkedIn article that said, by all statistical measures, this venture will fail. And yet we were going forward, and Jacqueline was supporting it, and Acumen was supporting it. But the statistics weren't great, and yet we still had that kind of appetite for risk. And so one of the things that I tell Ali often is, 5 years from now, it's still possible that Amal Academy might not exist, or that we might fail. And I want you to know that that's an important possibility to keep in mind, to not be so terrified of failure, so terrified that you're ruining Benje Williams' life work, for example, that he's paralyzed or not able to make the tough decisions, or to try new programs, or to move into new regions, or to hire different types of people. I think it's really important that he keeps that hunger and that appetite for risk, and considers failure as still a possibility. So that's been a big lesson for me on the professional side. Lots of lessons on the personal side, which we can get into as well. But I'll share those two for now.
Thanks, Benje. And not to put too much pressure on Ali, ruining Benje Williams' life and his life's work. Hope you're listening there, Ali. Seth, when you talk, the thing I've been really obsessed about of late, and I think almost all organizations are going to go through a period right now of turnover, as so many people are reflecting on this past year, what's important to them. People are weary, no matter whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you are working in an organization. Life has felt hard, and even with the opening up, it's a chance for rebirth, for renewal, including renewing our commitments. So we've almost just gone through a collective dip, and right now we're in this lethargic yet super promising period. And I've been thinking so much about what assumptions are we willing to abandon so that we can embrace a new, bigger set, to quote you, Seth, and then get to the next level. And this is for any of us. How do you even get to those assumptions that you should be abandoning that allow you then to get to the bigger set? Kat talks about speaking to people who are close to it. Seth, what's your wisdom for yourself in terms of this moment in the pandemic, what we're each trying to do, and how you get to the next level?
There's so many ways to play with this Rubik's Cube. We've got to talk about scale, and we can talk about ego. And if we talk about scale, if you're trying to make the world better, then it's easy to imagine that until you hit everyone, you have failed. And there's the old story about the starfish on the beach and the person throwing it back and saying, well, yeah, but there's so many starfish. To this starfish, going back in the water matters. So on one hand, we're talking about how do you do systemic change? If we look at how many institutions have learned about patient capital, have learned about the ideas that you have been sharing and copied them and improved them, your leverage is enormous, much bigger than it seems to be. But there are still people who have no electricity, and there are still people who are living in abject poverty. So how big is enough? And we have to prioritize which projects are we working on and why. Because making a difference in the lives of 5 people is vitally important. And if that is your goal, that is what you should do. If, on the other hand, you're seeking systemic change, then you can't wake up in the middle of the night and run to save one person, because that keeps you from doing the systemic change you said you wanted to sign up for, which is where the ego part comes in. Because every other nonprofit is run by someone other than you, and they're doing fine without you at some level. And, Benje made a huge impact in Pakistan, and he also established a model that others can follow. But he can now go do a new thing for forests, and the work in Pakistan isn't his life's work, it's just his most recent project. And those are 2 different things. And once we can see our work as a series of projects that we can choose based on our prioritization of scale and impact and personal engagement, we can say, I can put a ribbon around this and leave it for someone who can take it to the next level. And then I'm going to go do this other thing that I'm really good at, because that's going to take a different sort of commitment. And I wrestle with this all the time. And that's the argument of the smallest viable audience. Kat built Cinnabon into something that's much, much bigger than it was when she got there. But I've never had a Cinnabon, and I never will. So if her goal was everyone, she should still be working at it. But she's never going to hit everyone. So we got to decide what is the scale of the project and what is our role in it, where we can have the most leverage and also live a life that we're proud to have lived.
You're making me think of 2 things, Seth. One was a holiday lunch we had as our tradition. And early with Acumen, you were like, you got to make a decision. Are you a boutique or are you going for big systemic scale? And at that point, you thought maybe I should be a boutique. And I was like, I want the scale. And I don't know if you remember that conversation. But
are you kidding? I think about that conversation all the time. And what you did was basically impossible. What you did was accomplish something at scale without having 1,000 employees and without raising $5 billion, because you have scaled the ideas more than you have scaled the staff.
We have. I mean, it's been the power of a network. It's the power of community. But thank you for that. That was one piece of it. The other piece of it, though, that you're making me think about, and Kat, actually, all 3 of you, is I'm not sure that if you're signing up for the work of change, of real, deep, systemic change, you almost definitionally are signing up for the work of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it is. And I have a friend right now who had a brain injury, and it's really bringing me back to when my sister Amy had major brain surgery and brain trauma, and going through that with her as she went on that long, cruel, slow road of rehabilitation. That was also the work that I had somehow signed up to do my whole life, and it's the work that all of you have signed up to do, which is that you're not doing business as usual. You're actually trying to change something and create a new entity altogether, a new way of doing things altogether. And so you have to teach new muscles. You have to almost alert your nerve endings that they have to respond in new ways. And it moves forward and then it falls back. And so I do think that what you're talking about, Seth, is that aspirational commitment and then that willingness to keep learning, to have the courage to change direction. but not so much that it takes you in any way off the path to your North Star.
And when you encounter an overcomable roadblock, and I've seen acumen come across them regularly, you don't get depressed by this. You should get excited about this because now you've figured out the hard part. It's like in a caper movie when they finally get to the safe that they have to open. Right? All the other part of the journey was doable. It's the safe that's the important part. So when you get to the part that feels like the overcomable dip, this is great news because it means that you are one step closer to the thing you're trying to solve. If it doesn't get hard, then you're not leaning into it enough.
Okay, but talk to me, any of you, Benji, Kat, talk to me about how you do it, because it's a lot to ask someone. Some of us do have that inner fire of, this is a great opportunity. Every problem, we just see it as an opportunity. And some of us sometimes really need to be accompanied. How has that role of leaning on others helped you guys get through? Benji, Kat, you want to take it?
Sure. First, I think that the leaning on others helps me with perspective, trying to bring in perspective that helps me both see what's possible, that its role might be to expand my sense of possibility and my permission to walk into that possibility, but also some competence, some traction, some courage, some confidence to take the steps. The comfort with being uncomfortable and the vulnerability and willingness to just ask questions. And instead of looking for the grand mentor or the great shepherd, who's going, or the Sherpa who's into the unknown territory and solve my problems, but simply being willing to ask questions, being curious, which means being willing to be very clear that I don't know or have the answers. And while to some that may have maybe in former years been framed as weakness or lack of competence, what I've observed in myself and others is those who ask questions seem more confident. You must be comfortable in your own skin if you're willing to ask for directions. You must be comfortable in your own place if you're willing to ask for help. And asking seems to lead to then someone who could help on the journey if that's what's right in that moment. And one story that comes to mind, related to impact in particular, and certainly bridging to nonprofits. I've been doing work in Eastern Africa for about now 12 years, and in a odd way, and then led me to more work in Ethiopia. And I remember being working with villages on the Somali border of Ethiopia, which at the time, was pretty heavy conflict zones. Al Qaeda was coming in through Yemen and Djibouti and doing a lot of conversion on the border, and we were there as civilians to help with kind of self-sufficiency. And I was with several people who had never been to the region and had a Western mindset, more, kind of to Seth's point of, impossible list of problems. And Seth, I love what you said about kindling and finding the things that are sort of the breadcrumbs to the great change. And we were passing a tiny village, asking, especially the children, for help and money. There weren't a lot of English words known. Money was one of them that they did know very well. And it tore our hearts apart. And the locals who had grown up in the villages and come out to be change makers in the region looked at us and said, if you stop here and give them your money and give them the resources, make the impact that it can in the larger village we're going to down the road. And then when we got...
Kat, I think your microphone is breaking up.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. Is this a little better?
Yes, much better. Can you tell the story starting with the kids in the village asking for
Sure.
money?
Yes, thank you. So we stopped in this first village, and there were children asking for money, and it tore at our heartstrings. And my friends who had not been to the region before said, we have to stop. It's irresponsible to not stop. These kids look sick. how can we not stop? Grew up in these villages and made it out to the larger city, to Addis, and we're doing this work with NGOs and civil groups to help bring entrepreneurial mindsets to the region so that people could help themselves. Said, no, if we stop here, if we give our money and our time, the opportunity cost of the impact that could make in this next larger village is too great. And so we need to keep going. And we need to pass on what feels like a need and go to this next larger village. Well, when we got to the next larger village, one of the guides happened to mention that there was an even bigger village down the road. And one of my friends said, wait a minute, why would we not then go to the biggest place by your previous guidance? And he looked at us and said, sometimes some things you have to find what is small enough to change and big enough to matter. And the larger village, he said, is so steeped in their ways that while it is not beyond effort or work, and I think it might be echoing if others are unmuted. So if you mute, that echo might stop. Perfect. There, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so he said, if we go to the largest village with far more people who do not want to change at this moment, the time we get back to the city, they will wrap around the existing culture. And the small village is not as much impact as we could make. And so the middle village in this example was small enough to change and big enough to matter. And there's so many layers to that experience and that story around mindset and understanding. So back to who's close to the action, who are those that with knowledge of creating real change on the ground, and then how do we pair our heart and our instinct with the guidance of those seems to be impossible work creating progress. And so that story just came to mind as both Jacqueline, you were talking, and Seth, you were talking about kindling these things that are stairways to change and progress that are real change, not just throwing effort at the idea of.
Yeah. Benji, what that brings up for me listening to Kat, and Kat, thank you for that, is the way that you have found those guides almost in your life. Both people who are much younger than you, who are very close to the ground. You've had guides who are in their 90s, Pakistani and otherwise, that have helped you not just get through the dips, but then pivot to where you can be the most impactful. And I'm wondering if you could just choose one or two of those guides and what they brought to you to help you move to that next place, particularly, again, thinking about where everybody is right now.
Yeah, well, I won't say you or Seth because I feel like that's cheating a little bit, even though those are very easy answers, and I would love to tell those stories. I'll share two, both very different. One is, the 90-year-old grandfather to me in many ways, Syed Babar Ali, affectionately called Babar Saab, who's the New York Times called not just an institution builder, but an institution. And this was back in like the 70s or 80s. And of course, he has continued to grow Pakistan really into what it is. I mean, he was 16 or 17 when the country was founded, and has set up one of the most reputable universities in the country, and really has taken Amal Academy and Acumen underneath his wing from really day one. I remember as a fellow in Lahore with Acumen in 2010, meeting him, and then coming back 2 or 3 years later after school, grad school, and sitting in his office and just the surprised look on his face, like you came back, and then all of the conversations that we had after that, probably once a quarter, including him showing up to our academy and meeting our students inviting us to his village where he has a school, Sidonwala School, and learning about the kind of education and the vision that they're doing out in more of a rural setting. And then meeting him even out in California when he's visiting and trying to make connections between California and the US and Pakistan, and on behalf of Amala Academy. And then the second I want to mention is Bavidra, who I think is on this call as well. Very different, not quite 90 yet, someone around the same age as I am. And just someone who was a fellow with me during Acumen, during our Acumen Global Fellowship in 2010, and has always been there just as someone to talk to and to share the things that seem almost unbearable. Things that, frankly, it would be hard to even share with Babar Saab because maybe of age difference, or because I still feel like he needs to believe in Amal Academy, and so that the imposter syndrome that I sometimes would feel, or the doubt or the fear, it would be hard to share that fully with him. But Bavidra, even though he might not have answers, would just listen. And what I found, my therapist says, and what's shareable becomes more bearable, just by the process of sharing or articulating something, bringing it out into the world, it becomes easier to carry with me or have someone else help carry it. And so I think in terms of getting through the dip, or getting through the dips, plural, and continuing in perpetuity in a way, I think those two, amongst many others, have made a big difference.
One of your extraordinary skills, Benje, is that you are committed enough to talk about the hard parts. That in the times I've spent with you, there hasn't been a lot of surgery needed to get to the guts of it. That you can see you are confronting this and you can talk about it. And that's available to all of us, but you're one of the few people who have the guts to do it.
Thanks for that.
I agree with you, Seth. It does make me wonder. I mean, sometimes I would say Benji's too tough on himself, and how to also find people in your life who will be that cheerleader. Especially if we've grown up in cultures where we almost hold this idea that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger as a badge. And sometimes I wonder if what doesn't kill us just nearly kills us. And so how to know the difference and how to make that decision that enough, and move and move beyond apology, and any stories from our own lives there.
I could share something, Jacqueline, but before I do, I want to invoke my responsibility as host and moderator of this room to remind everyone that if you have questions or a comment, or would like this group to weigh in on something, there are two ways to do that. Use the little airplane button at the bottom right to message me directly your question, and I will scan those, or type in your bio your question or your comment and raise your hand, and that will show up in the hand raise queue, and we can see those as well as we wind down our time together. So just want to remind everyone, we'd love to hear your questions or thoughts or challenge to this, and so please do engage with us. And just me around this idea of, what doesn't kill us make us stronger, or is it just almost killing us? I remember when I was wrapping up my career at Hooters. I'd started as a hostess and a waitress, and then became an executive at 800 million around the world. And these were simply the opportunities that were in front of someone who came from a land of no opportunities. And I felt very proud of them until I didn't. And then there was something that popped into my, that between the gap between who I was becoming outside of work and who I was, what I was doing at work, the gap was growing because I was changing. And that happened in a personal relationship. I was in an 11-year relationship. And to his credit, I got change. And I did. And it was, I had to recognize that. And my friend circle was changing and my interests were changing. And I was almost using those interests as an escape. But I had to recognize that. And it took me a while to recognize that and then use that as a courage to say, look, all things don't have to perfectly line up in my life, to the point of the room I was just hosting before this of being a multi-hyphenate. But when I recognize emotional labor, that the gap between who I naturally am today, which is probably different, especially for me, years ago, and who I'm needing to show up as or what I'm needing to spend my energy on, the bigger the gap, the greater the emotional labor. And it is labor. And I started leaning into nonprofit work in Atlanta in my backyard as a solve for difficult times. And then I realized my bucket was draining in one place and I was going somewhere completely different to fill it up. And while not everything has to fill my bucket, it's a book I love to read my toddler children, The Bucket Filler. Not everything has to fully fill my bucket at all times. I had to recognize, to your point of almost killing me, when something was appropriately draining it, and when I actually had the power to make a change. And as I've matured, I've grown to recognize the smoke signals as opposed to waiting until, whether it's the dynamics, the stress, the moral dilemma, the questions that I have are so great. I think externally just happens because the universe will create a change if you don't. Or when I am courageous enough to make the change. And I think as I've matured, and I've gotten much more comfortable with recognizing the smoke signals long before it's almost killing me, whatever that means, physically, stress, emotionally, mentally, morally, ethically, so that I can make those changes. And part of the way I do it, in the spirit of giving people something to walk away with, is every week, every Sunday, I practice the hot shot rule. It's a term that I coined about 10 years ago. I practiced it quarterly and then monthly and now weekly. And every Sunday at noon, after I put my youngest daughter, my nap, I stop. I imagine someone I admire. And this Sunday, it will be almost a Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head of all of you, because you're so inspiring. And I will ask myself one question, which is, if you took over my role tomorrow, what is one first thing that you would change? And for whatever reason, the answer comes to my mind. And then I ask, why can't that be me? And I take action on it, either initiating it or taking care of it within 24 hours. And then I tell whoever the affected stakeholders are. I say I practice the hot shot rule because people know that's something I do. But if you don't practice it, or that would confuse people, I was thinking that if you were in my role, this is one thing you would take action on. And I was thinking about it, but I did it. And every week I get better at progressing on one thing, it with a beginner's mind, but with my existing knowledge. I've realized that, we get comfortable and complacent and we're blinded by our own progress. And I use the tool of envisioning people I admire to help me bring what is definitely somewhere buried in my mind of what is something on before it almost kills me or before it just puts me on the path. It's the kindling, for what to use Seth's word, that almost will kill us, to take action on it and be a little bit better at something each week.
I love that. And Kat, since we're out of time, you've just really raised the bar to probably an impossible level. But the kindling rule, the hot shot rule, Benje, Seth, if there's something that you would offer as a take to everyone in this conversation about the dip, about the moving through, about the using this moment in our history and in our organizational places in which we're sitting, not just to endure and slog through, but to change assumptions, move to another level. What would you leave us with?
I guess I'd ask people what they use for fuel. Some people use the quest for money or fame as fuel. they will never have enough of it. And if it is getting them what they need and what they want, then it's effective. If you are seeking to be a moral leader, what fuels you hour by hour, day by day, week by week? What are you keeping track of? What interactions are the ones you remember months later? And if you can arrange alignment between the fuel and the work, then the stress disappears. And too often we are seduced into thinking that the metrics that somebody else thinks are important must be important to us. And we shouldn't embrace somebody else's metrics. We need our own fuel.
Love that. Thank you, Seth. Benji?
Yeah, I love that too. These days, working on the forest restoration startup understory, things are still going much slower than I would want. And so I love this question because I think it's something I need to think about daily. I guess the thing I would share that has helped me get through the current dip is understanding what it is that really, I guess what Seth said, gives me fuel, what it is that makes me feel alive. And I was thinking of the Mary Oliver poem. Perhaps it's the desire to create something beautiful that is the God that's inside of each of us. And for me, it's this desire to create something, even if it's small, even if no one sees it. And so each day, I try and start my day and spend a significant amount of time just doing some writing, reflecting, and working on small writing projects that help me tap into that creativity. Even if with the forest restoration startup, I'm not necessarily creating as much as I want to every day. I have something, like Seth said, a series of projects that are giving me fulfillment. Maybe they'll materialize into something beautiful that others can see and appreciate, but maybe they're just beautiful for myself. And that's enough for me.
We've only done this twice, but I always find that it's right at the end when I want to start the conversation. Got to be a new skill to learn here, and I don't want to drop a bomb, but I really appreciate so deeply what you all have said. I can't help, for some reason, I keep going back to this, moment of a few months into the Rwandan genocide when it was clear that so much of what I had built was destroyed. And the lesson that took me a long time to internalize is that there's always a new chapter, and that you don't always have to go somewhere else to find that new chapter, but that chapter is within you to write. But it means almost a commitment to what you have committed to, and to renew the sense of what's possible, even if you're somehow suddenly facing a new set of possibilities. There's always a new chapter, and your life can change in an instant if you stay open to what that new chapter might be. So I want to respect everyone's time. I wish that we truly did have another hour, because I feel like this is the conversation to have. But the way that all three of you live, obsessed with other people, obsessed with truth, obsessed with not running from fear, but walking into fear, and the kind of courage that takes, so that what doesn't kill us, knowing what doesn't kill us barely will just keep us alive, and what doesn't kill us actually can not just make us stronger, but help us build a more beautiful world. So thank you so much, and thanks for everyone who's part of this conversation. We're going to have another one in 2 weeks from now, and I can't remember who the people are, but we'll let you know soon.
Awesome. And Jacqueline, one question that's coming in is, where can the recording be shared? People are noticing that it's recorded, and is there a place that they could catch it or snippets of it? A bunch of DMs.
Kat, that is the best question, and I'm sure we're going to put it on Acumen's website at acumn.org.
Okay,
at least we are now.
Okay, perfect. And what I'd say to everyone is just follow Acumen Fund and their tweets, and you will see information on this recording and if and how it will be shared. But thank you all for your DMs. Really, this discussion, there have been a ton of DMs of people saying they're just appreciating the conversation and not a lot of questions, which way for people to engage as well. So I want to thank everyone for hanging with us, for those who popped in at the end, for those who've been here the entire time, for Jacqueline, for your wisdom and these important topics being brought to a relevant and new platform, and Benje and Seth also for your perspective and your shared collective wisdom and you being open with your individual journeys. I'm sure you know this to a degree, but it really does impact and help people more than you know, including me. You inspire me deeply. So thank you all so much. And we will see you same club, Moral Leadership, same time, same day in 2 weeks. Have a great week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kat. Thanks,
so
Jacqueline.
much,
Thanks,
everyone.
Benji.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.